Welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Ryan Craven, and our guest today is Kim Milford. Kim has a long history within the information security industry, specifically including establishing these departments within higher education organizations. She serves as the executive director of the Research and Education Network's Information Sharing and Analysis Center. The center serves over 650 member institutions within the higher education and research community by promoting cybersecurity and operational protections and response. Today, Kim is going to share with us a bit of background about the SolarWinds hack that took place and some more recent trends, and the impacts that these can have on higher education and the commercial sector, as well as the foreign and political impacts that these events and groups can have. All right, Kim, thanks again for joining us this afternoon. And can you tell us a little bit about the kind of the SolarWinds hack, and let's kind of get into all the implications that that kind of event has.
Wow, the impact of this event is huge and still unfolding. So every day it's sort of evolving, and we're finding out more about it. And we've been in contact with our friends at SolarWinds, our colleagues there, and so they're starting to share more information about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So that's kind of a little bit of a sneak peek of where we are now. Going back to December, the way that this attack was different. It was very well planned and well executed. Sorry, in that it was a supply chain attack. So it didn't attack. In our case, it didn't attack a university. It attacked a supplier to the university. With this, they have this great, SolarWinds has this great management tool that allows you to manage your network better. And so it attacked that network management system that you can buy from SolarWinds. And so the downstream customers of SolarWinds were impacted by this. And this was the nastiest of the nasty pieces of it. We all rely on computer patching all the time. There's vulnerabilities, there's bugs, and the way they're fixed is through patches. And these darn bad actors, who we did find out were affiliated with Russia in the investigation, that was made clear. So we found that out, but these bad actors use those patches to disseminate the malware. So we trust patching, and it's an important part of keeping our computers safe. And the fact that they exploited that, just, it's very smart and very frightening. So supply chain attack, use of patches, massively different.
And so kind of correct me if I'm wrong, or kind of help explain it to me a little bit. So, they attacked the actual, tool. And as a result, through having access to that tool system and everybody that already has it, to your point, right? I mean, that's the reason why patches exist. And so they were using the patches to get out to the individual organizations that had purchased it.
Right. So you think about a very complex network diagram, because everyone's network diagram is complex in today's environment. And you trace back, okay, so this organization, the federal government has a network. Oh, and they use this tool to help manage the network. Oh, and this tool is supplied by SolarWinds. So I mean, they trace this back to figure out where weak points were, and where opportunities were. And I don't know, I still don't think we have a clear vision of what they were specifically after, or if it was a broad net and they were just happy to catch us all up in it.
Yeah, and kind of to your point too, with those groups having access to that information, or at least starting that process, which direction does it take from there? Is always a really curious and interesting direction. It's just it's wild. So kind of one of the things that I say impacted, what are you seeing? Are you seeing like any new implications from this hack, and kind of, I don't say what steps are being taken, because it's always evolving, right? And you're always trying to do the best you can, but what are some of the conversations that are kind of happening based on that?
So some of the downstream effects we're seeing, that we'll start seeing, is that data, because they they might have been, as I said, we don't know what they were after. We don't know what specific data they were after, but they got a lot more data than that and received a lot more access through their hack. So are we going to start seeing that data make appearances? Is there personally identifiable data that might start working its way out from this? So that's one of the more direct pieces. So first of all, they exfiltrated what they want to, and they're going to clean that and use that for whatever their core purposes are. Then they sell the data they don't need. And sometimes they sell the data they did need because they don't need it anymore. So we'll see that start coming into downstream hacker groups. We will see more and more copycat attacks on this because it was so successful. So I think that's where we'll start seeing more and more people attack supply side. I just want to do a real quick comparison to the Microsoft Exchange exploits, because that was also, if you think broadly, that was also supply side. And also, every bit as massive, if not more so, than SolarWinds, because everyone uses Microsoft, right? Mm-hmm. And that was but that happened. That was happening at the same time as SolarWinds, so I don't see that as a copycat. I see those as sort of concurrent. Mm-hmm. But we'll start seeing. We see that all the time. The hackers go, "Oh, that was successful. Let's do what they did," And I'm using the term hackers very generally.
Yeah. And so, and kind of to your point too, that they can make those adjustments and shifts and attacks faster than, the security can catch up to implementing, like how to stop that or how to catch that.
Yes. So now we're all looking at our suppliers and asking really good questions about their security practices. Because we did see with SolarWinds, there's a lot of rumors about they had weak password controls. That's all it takes to get in. I'm serious. People make fun of me. I'm like, did you use a good password? And they're like, oh, here she goes again. But that's all it takes. And so we can start now. It's clear we institutions and private organizations have a responsibility to ask that of our suppliers, because we need to know what their practices are to feel secure and safe in using their products.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, right, if, kind of go back to when Target had their big hack, right? It doesn't matter as an organization whose fault it is. If they got in through a supplier, it's still your organization was the one that got hacked, right? So if this happened to IU, for example, through SolarWinds management tool, it's not SolarWinds that, ultimately it was their product and their lack of protocol or however they exploited that weakness, but all the headlines are going to say IU got hacked.
Yes. So the reputation is much broader than the responsible organization.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the things that those suppliers can do or tighten up on, or that this has been identified as a new potential attack point? So what can they do to kind of step it up or try and prevent that?
In my mind, and this is a little bit of a soapbox for me, the software manufacturers and providers have been pushing market and money over security from the start. Mm-hmm. And they've gotten a little lax because we all have these great system administrators who take the patches and apply the patches, and then we're safe and we all pay attention to it. So we've developed this huge ecosystem around I'm just going to be frank, their faulty production. And so when I hear the CEO of SolarWinds talk about security by design, and that makes me feel really good, because it used to be in the old days with my mainframe, when I was a mainframe security person, and so at the end the programmers would come to me and go, okay, now turn the security on, and I would literally flip a bit to turn security on, and so security was an afterthought. And so this shifts that to, are we thinking about security by design from ground floor up in every step of development? Do we run tests to make sure it's still secure? Do we have strong administrator practices, for passwords and version control and things like that? So there's many questionnaires and checklists that you can use for your own organization or for cloud, vendors, cloud providers, that you can ask them to fill out and say, can you tell us what your security practices are? Now, some of them, and it's a one-on-one decision, right? That maybe you have mitigations in place, so you don't care. You're like, oh, they do that. That's okay because we have this control. So it's always a little bit of a weighing and analysis there. Not a one-to-one, oh, they're bad or oh, they're good.
Yeah.
But looking at those questionnaires, the federal government has what they call FedRAMP for their vendors, and the higher ed has something called the Higher Ed Community Vendor Assessment Toolkit. So everyone's starting to look at that and thinking about that, and we'll see greater application of those as a result of this, and we'll see the manufacturers increase their security.
Clearly, kind of your expertise and area of focus in all of this is coming from the education and the research side of that. Have you seen an increase in hackers trying to access kind of the research institutions and more of just that academic and kind of the U.S. university side of stuff?
We saw this trend start the earliest I saw it was 2015. A few well-known science or engineering schools were I don't know that they were attacked. They were threatened, if not attacked. And there was FBI investigations and things like that. So we knew that this was happening. And when it's U.S. research institutions, it often comes from China. They're the biggest group trying to, as a nation state, trying to get a hold of our research. Not just our research either. We're, higher ed's a small piece of the research puzzle. So they're also going to the commercial vendors and trying to get get information from Dow and Pfizer now with the vaccination and everything too. So we started seeing it then. It had died off a little bit in recent years, and then COVID, it just picked up and skyrocketed again. So we started seeing, I get alerts all the time from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, and they present information about investigations, not the details, but they say we know that this attack is coming from these, IPs in China. It looks like the same behavior of this known threat group that's been working for 10 years. So they started saying that. And then the private security firms started saying that too, like FireEye and Mandiant, for example. So we started seeing more of that when COVID vaccination research and even COVID testing, tracing and testing applications started hitting the market. We started seeing people try to steal that instead of innovate their own. So it did pick up again with COVID. And let me stop there. I think you had a second part, but I don't want to miss that. So I don't want to miss that.
Yeah, just kind of that side of it is obviously increased. And again, getting to the pandemic, it's thrown everybody into a much more of a work learn remotely environment. And or what are the kind of those considerations with like IU, for example? We have a lot of international students that normally they would be on campus here in Bloomington, but now they're still in China or India or abroad, and wherever their home country is, and can't travel due to the pandemic, but they're still online, they're still taking courses and all of that. So, what's that balancing act of providing those students enough access to do what they need to do and get their education, especially if they're in a science field, right, and doing some research, but while also still limiting what they do have access to in case somebody uses that or wants to use that as an avenue for access.
It's been a very big challenge, especially I'm singling out China a little bit here because they have very strict rules, very strict national rules around what applications you can have, what access you can have. and that includes some common teaching and learning tools, teaching, learning, collaboration tools. So that's made it very challenging. Sometimes the students have gotten wiser and figured out ways to get what they need. So a little bit on their side, I've seen that happen in recent months. And then the schools have had to be a little patient, and multiple solutions, right? We've used a lot of virtual private networking, VPN, to secure the tunnel from the end user all the way to campus. And some of those are not permitted in China. So some people had to switch users, or at least, or I'm sorry, switch systems, or at least switch systems for their Chinese students. And you know, it's a best efforts thing, unfortunately. It's not that they're singled out, but Chinese students are probably the most impacted by this.
Yeah. Well, and it'd be interesting to see the long-term impacts of that on higher education. As you know, I think this whole concept has shifted to, you know, online learning is the academic trend going to head that way? And then these are those considerations to think about. It like, if we're only going to offer online X, Y, or Z degree, and you have these connection and access issues for international students, like, is enrollment going to take a hit?
Yeah, that's another long-term effect that higher ed has to consider, right?
Yeah.
And you know, getting back to the primary research question, is our research available enough to the students and the researchers and the faculty, but secure enough from other people? And it's another tightrope. So COVID is forcing us on a lot of tightropes here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, like to your point of finding new access and attack points, it's, you know, yeah, great. That bridge between, you know, the students and here is fantastic in lockdown, so nobody's going to jump through that. But you know, what other stuff is that student or that, you know, PC using or doing on their own? And so once it's there, how easy is it to get access to? So just holes within holes within holes, and a lot of different layers to consider.
Exactly. And another layer on top of that is my computer at home. Is it a multi-use computer? When I'm in the office, it's not, but all of a sudden I'm at home. Indiana University doesn't control my ISP. They can't, you know, we can do all sorts of scanning on computers that hit the IU network. But if I'm not ever hitting the IU network, they don't know that my kids downloaded a bunch of bad spam software on here, you know.
And sometimes you don't know either. My daughter's only 2, so I've got a little bit of time to think about that. But you know, I was a kid growing up too, and playing on mom and dad's computer.
Yeah. If you know, if your computer, just general advice, if your computer is acting suspicious, assume it is.
that is good information. And so kind of one of the things that I want to bring up too, and kind of get your perspective on is, you know, you mentioned that the SolarWinds hack was investigated to, you know, a Russian group. You know, China obviously is always, you know, throwing attacks our way. And so you have all these different groups abroad, and it seems like some of them are officially, unofficially, however that term is, you know, state sponsored. And so what are those what are those conversations that surrounds that from a national security, foreign relations, you know, kind of part of that bigger policy picture in general?
Again, you're just peeling away all the layers of the onion here. And what we saw, you know, we talked to the FBI. I'm going to go back even longer than I mentioned 2015. So I'm going to go back to 2005. I was at an institution, and the FBI came to visit, and they had the president and several of the muckety mucks there. And so they invited me, and the FBI said, well, you need to let us know if any students are from a given country are acting suspiciously. And I said, legal counsel needs to be in this meeting now. And I went and got them and brought them in, and they were like, we're not going to we're not just going to talk about this, so the school was very respectful of the privacy and confidentiality, and that might impact teaching and learning, and they wanted to think that through. But they said, well, so they wrote a policy per se saying, here's what we need to tell the FBI when we see these sorts of activities and it does look suspicious, but we need to have that conversation with the student at the same time. We don't want to give things away to them, but we want to have this conversation. So, kind of delicately looking at that. So we knew way back then that the FBI was starting to see activity, because they don't just go visit schools. They're too busy to go visit schools unless there's known investigations. Yeah. So that was sort of the earliest inkling to me that was going on. And then we started seeing them, the FBI was very concerned about physical access of foreign students to research, which just makes me laugh, because the bad actors in China can get to everything here. That's what they do, so it doesn't matter if they're here or if they're somewhere else. And then another side on that was all the insiders who have been prosecuted for access to trade secrets, especially research, are all Native American citizens, Native U.S. citizens. Mm-hmm. So that, there's no saying that a Chinese person is more susceptible than an American person. Hey, I want money too. Heck yeah, I'll bring home this USB with some info on it. Yeah. There's corruption everywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but it does have policy impact.
Yeah, and let's get to the policy here in a second. But your conversation too kind of brought up another point of, you're starting to monitor students, and where is that fine line of, okay, well, suspicious behavior is, so I appreciate that identifying these action items are taking place. Okay, now we have enough cause to dig a little deeper, but even just the broader perspective of just observation and catching some of that stuff, right, it's another just kind of, I would say gray area, but a tricky area.
Yeah. And it feels so cynical, that do you think everyone's a spy? Maybe in my field you do a little bit. Maybe I'm just a cynical person now. Because if your suspicions aren't rising, maybe you're letting someone, I don't know. I can't answer that, but I'm puzzled by that quite a bit.
Oh, I can only imagine, right? No news is good news, but is it really?
Or was I just not paying close enough attention?
Or just haven't got caught yet?
Yeah.
So when it kind of comes back around to, especially, network security and information technology and all that realm, again, knowing that, Russia has a group, sponsored by the intelligence agency that is constantly just poking and prodding at whatever and wherever they want, on U.S., companies and organizations. Where does that come into the conversation on kind of a global perspective, right? Like right now, my layman's interpretation is everybody knows it and everybody does it. So, okay.
That's a bit true too. So a book that I read and really enjoyed, probably because it's a nerdy book, and I'm nerdy, but really laid out the global sociopolitics of this, is a book called Sandworm, and it's by I have it over here somewhere. I was looking for it, but I don't see it right now. It's by a writer who writes for Wired magazine, and it's about the Sandworm is an advanced persistent threat group in Russia, and he uncovers more about that group than really anyone knew before. And so you really start to see the depth of Russian national support, the depth of subterfuge, how they try these tactics in Ukraine before they started applying them elsewhere in the world. And, in their own backyard is sort of easy. So highly recommended book to get into a lot of these details about how they lay their work out. It's not really about defense. It's really just, it's sort of a journalist view, you know. But highly recommended.
I'll have to check that out. And yeah, and one of the things that kind of sprung to my mind was, you have a group like that operating. It's relatively well known. Identifying and actually targeting and making arrests, or take punitive action against those kind of groups, I would assume is extremely challenging. Because how do you actually show up to the house where they're at doing the stuff with enough, evidence? But how easy is it for a government to say, well, we're not actually sponsoring them, we're buying them stuff that they're getting, but they're not actually ours. And then it's, well, we identified they're doing something illegal, so you need to do something. And the whole circle.
Yeah,
it's a fascinating subject.
And many of these people who might be, and this is a little bit of conjecture, and a little bit of knowledge too, from what I know of investigations and having read this book. These people that are now part of a big strategic hacking organization that's most likely state sponsored, started doing the small stuff, started doing the phishing, started, and they realized the big fish were, I can make more money out of this. And they use ransomware both to hide their activities, but also to raise money for their other activities. They look at their tool sets so strategically and go, oh, I'll use this tool set here because of this thing. I used to have a slide that I used quite a bit. It was a FireEye slide about like all the different tools that a nation state actor used to get into one institution. And it was around the Mabna, the Iranian hacker scandal of a couple years ago. And there, I want to say there were 28 tools they deployed to get everything they could out of that attack. That's not happenstance. That's well-planned strategy.
Well, and it's not just, like you said, it's not just that one person figuring out how to do that. It's that one person that has that knowledge and knack, and then gets part of a bigger group that has that strategic vision or plan, and opens up all sorts of other avenues.
Right. And so when you look at that, we can't, we always are looking for the silver bullet. What do we do? How do we stop this from happening? What one thing can I do? There is never just one thing. That we need to have this defense in depth mentality too. We need to, multi-factor authentication is a really helpful tool for attacks against logins and passwords. It doesn't help against servers that are attacked or threatened. It doesn't help to patch vulnerabilities, which is what the SolarWinds attack was based on. So, you've got to build that wall brick by brick with all these different controls, and then you have to refresh it because the attacks evolve.
Like you said, kind of security by design. It's kind of, this whole conversation made me think of the old term of the best defense is a good offense. And I don't know how that actually applies in directly to the field, but just kind of to the point of, if you're always on the back foot, always defensive, these groups have nothing but time.
Yeah. So we need to help with educating the next generation of people to fight this, of people looking at the threats. Threat hunting is now a field in cybersecurity where, 10 years ago, I hadn't even heard the term. So you go out and actively look and find those threats, and then you can help the rest of us to mitigate it by telling us about it. Information sharing and analysis, that's, the name of my center is Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So I'm big on those concepts. Absolutely true. I worry about federal government classifications because they block the information sharing sometimes. But we're working with them. They're our partners, and they're going to try to, so they'll say, hey, are you seeing anything about PISA ransomware? They'll just kind of ask me offhand. then I can help people with just knowing they're interested in that, right? Without, and they do it to protect their victim, the victims they're working with. I totally understand that.
Sure.
So, looking at what the federal government is doing, but beware of classifications, and then just building from that, and trying to get the information out, get the analysis out. If you're in incident response, you are dealing with one incident every moment, every minute, unless it's a really big incident. So you're like, oh, this one is phishing, this one is phishing, this one is phishing, this one is phishing, this one isn't. Huh, that's sort of interesting. And you're not connecting phishing number 1 with phishing number 10. So you need your systems to go, these two phishing emails use the exact same scheme and came from the exact same place. So let's let our systems do some of that analysis for us so that we can start catching these bigger patterns. And that's what the FBI always is. They're very frustrated by, because nobody logs the big patterns.
Nobody's sharing that information, and kind of to the point, right? The defense almost needs to take that strategic approach, but kind of the challenge there is it requires the sharing or the access to that and the monitoring, obviously, and kind of by default when you're having these conversations, it's like, no, we can't talk to any of this to anybody because that's opening up more access. And so it's, but that's interesting to hear that, threat detection, just kind of the evolution and the continued evolution in the technology field of just new careers, new directions, new jobs. And I mean, that's just never gonna change because technology and all of the different things that comes along with it is changing, and how we use it and access is just always moving.
It is. Yes. We do a lot of what we call automated threat intelligence sharing. And so, it might be a domain or a URL or even an email address, badguy.com or badguy at, Gmail. And so then we share that out and say, these are known bad actors, but the bad actors are now changing that every minute. So we can't stop that control, but at the same time, we have to start building more analysis of what's inside our organizations and going out. So we're like, well, Ryan's computer doesn't normally ping, the Ukraine at 3 a.m. and it has the last three mornings. What's going on there? So our systems will get smarter. This is a great application of AI. Got to drop that buzzword, right? Machine learning, because letting our machines get smarter for us and then present that information to us so that we're making the decision, oh, do I need to block that activity until I can find more? Or do I just want to watch it for a few more days? So we can make the ultimate decision, but letting our machines see that and present that to us is going to help us make the appropriate defense, which might be offense.
Who knows?
And gather that information to give to an investigative unit like the FBI, which is another thing that we don't necessarily do well right now.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's hard to give them what they need when they don't ask, or by the time they ask, is it too late? Or the other side of that coin too, can they handle that much of an influx of information to having programs and algorithms be able to sort and shift and do all that? I would not want the job of taking reports daily from like universities and like, oh well, this is what their security's like, and having to filter and it'd be impossible.
Yeah. Data analytics is another one of those field of the futures.
Absolutely.
Because we're all going to need that for one area or another. Because the data the data doesn't matter. The analytics matter. Yep.
Well, and it seems like because the data and the access to it seems to keep growing exponentially, right? Like every time you take your phone outside somewhere, somebody is tracking something to share with somebody or sell to somebody. Yes. Well, Kim, thanks for I say trying to chip away at some of those layers. I know it's just, I mean, you can go down and dig deep forever, and just by the very nature, the relationships and the conversation is just multifaceted to an amazing degree. But it's been fantastic information. Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I hope it was helpful and eye-opening for folks, and happy to answer any questions that come back after this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again. That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. For future topics or suggestions, please drop us a line at cyber@indiana.edu.